It does.
it
It might
does.
just be
Okay.
behind the, yeah, if you have like.
Okay, that's fine. Because we had talked about that back and forth and I just wanted to be sure.
Okay, Nuchi, we have 43 people out of 60, but some people are here, Kathy's friends from England, which means that they're up very late already. So I think we should start because it's already about 6:04 anyway. So
yes, certainly.
Thank you.
The Zoom link that was sent, the message had no content, so meaning I couldn't log on, and a lot of people are having the same problem.
Ah, okay. Hopefully they'll straighten it out, Pat will.
Hi, Teresa.
I was going to say,
So-
Nucci, is it possible for Claire to just resend that to everybody who signed
Yeah,
up?
but yeah, Claire, you'll have to send it to everybody because what Pat sent, we could not log onto. And let me ask, Nusrat, are you going to say a few words about the WNDC, given that there are a lot of non-WNDC people on this
Oh, I
call?
thought that was that's what you were
Okay,
going to.
so should I begin?
Yes, please. And
Okay.
and in the meantime, I think I'll see if I can't text Walter or somebody to get the list and send off. Or Claire, can you do it?
I mean, I don't have the list, so I don't know.
Okay. So let me see if I can get hold of Pat and do it. Okay.
And I need Claire. I need Claire's undivided attention.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so should I begin, Nusrat?
Yes, please.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Nuchi Karir. I'm the president of the Women's National Democratic Club. Delighted with this large presence today, which I think will only get larger on this Zoom program once everybody has the correct link. Just a very few words about the Women's National Democratic Club. We are a 98-year-old institution created 2 years after women won the right to vote in the country. And our motto, from the right to vote, the power to lead, that's been our quest and that's been our mission. And we thought in 2016 that we were going to have a female president in the White House. In 2020, we finally managed to get a vice president in the White House. So we're delighted about that. We are a museum, we are an art gallery, we are a social club, we're a policy house, we're a political house. So we're many, many, many interesting things rolled into one. We are housed in this beautiful mansion at DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C., called the Whittemore House. And we do speaker programs at least twice a week. We used to do them in-house in our beautiful mansion. Now we are doing Zoom programming like today. So if times had been normal and COVID hadn't been as rampant as it is, a lot of people would have been on site to see the beautiful art that's displayed in our ballroom. And with this, I'm going to hand over to Nusrat. Welcome, everybody. We want all of you to be members. We want you to visit us. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Nuchi. I join Nuchi in welcoming everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Nuzhat Sultan, and I'm the Director for Visual Arts and Museum Affairs and the curator of the galleries of the Women's National Democratic Club. Tonight's virtual artist opening is for Kathy Klein, whose work, Women's Narratives, I am very pleased and excited to exhibit in our ballroom gallery and now share with you. I want to acknowledge Claire Sandberg, our invaluable VAMA assistant. This event could not have been possible without Claire's help. Claire not only does all the graphic work for these exhibitions, but also does innumerable tasks. So I shan't go into all of that. She's managing the slides this evening and chat questions during the Q&A following Kathy's talk. So if you have any questions that you'd rather not vocalize, then please just write them into the chat room and we'll get to them when Kathy is finished. Now, I wanted to say a few words about her work or how artists perceive things. So artists since time immemorial have made social commentary of what's happening around them through their art. Sometimes this is expressed overtly and sometimes very subtly. Kathy has used very powerful abstract and semi-abstract paintings to convey women's narratives of a challenging subject. Challenging since society has not wanted to discuss these openly. Until the Me Too movement brought it to the forefront and it became evident that women would not be silenced. Kathy, as some of you know, lives in Gloucester, Virginia, and has come to art after a career in women's studies. We're very fortunate to have her exhibit here. I now ask Kathy to please tell us about the painting she has selected from our exhibition.
Thank you. I want to thank the WNDC, Nuzat, Claire Sullivan, and Carol Rogers for their part in making this, this Zoom talk and the exhibition possible. It's a great honor for me to be shown in the gallery, and it's great fun to be here on the Zoom. When I tell people that I have a series of paintings, among whose titles are Rape and Sexual Harassment, the first thing they naturally say is, why? And I'd like to answer that question. I was previously, prior to that, I was painting abstract landscapes and of my travels. And after a while, it seemed like I didn't have any place particular to go with that. And I wanted to paint things which were important to me. My career of 35 years in women's studies told me that feminist issues were at the core of my beliefs. But I also spent the first 20 years of my life in a strongly Catholic home and 12 years in Catholic schools. So I know about sin. And I am familiar with the 7 deadly sins, which are, in case you haven't got them in your mind, pride, greed, wrath, lust, gluttony, envy, and sloth. Yeah. I say that if rape had been on that list initially, I would never have had to paint the Me Too series. But it wasn't, and so I did. I grappled for about 5 years, researching, reading, thinking, playing around, and finally painting these 8 canvases. It was extremely emotional for me. I'm lucky, with the exception of sexual harassment, I've not experienced these particular issues, but that did not make it much easier to read and to think and to talk with people about this. I tried and failed maybe a dozen times, painting the ideas, painting to be aesthetically satisfying and still get everything there without showing women who had been raped or battered or were cowering in a corner. And so I opted to go to what's called non-objective art. This is art where form, shape, line, and color dominate. There are no objects like the silhouette of a human being on your screen. There are no objects in non-objective art for us to hang on to. Much of what we know about the painter's intentions then come from the titles. And you'll see that that's true here this evening as well. My 8 canvases have several things in common. First of all, size. They are all 20 by 20, which means that you can see them from a distance, but you also want to come up close because there are smaller elements embedded within the larger canvases. Secondly, they share the same color palette, variety of reds, a number of grays, and black. Thirdly, they have 3-dimensional elements collaged onto them, glued, painted, stuck, wrapped, any number of different ways. And I'm going to be detailing those for you as we go through the individual paintings. But these are paintings which, in order to understand in the way that I have painted them, viewers need to have titles, which is why it's a good thing that galleries use wall titles. Otherwise, they might seem very interesting, but I don't think people would necessarily know what I'm all about. The first image, Claire.
Yeah.
Thank you. The first image is perhaps the strongest and the simplest visually. There are 7 or 8 layers of various reds, providing depth in the center section. Around the edges, there is a give or take 2-inch irregular framing feature, which is also red. The strong black and red is what gives this painting its impact. And from across a room, you do see this painting, you do notice it. But unless you come up close, you might think that these black vertical slashes are paint, just more acrylic paint. And it's not until you get close, and I'm not even sure if you all can tell by looking at the screen, I can, but maybe you can't, that they are actually shredded pantyhose.
Wow.
The notion of shredded pantyhose and rape is what brought them into my visual ken. I think that this painting, I would conclude that this painting is aesthetically satisfying. It does have a strong visual impact. It has considerable compositional strength, and certainly the color and the vividness of the black is aesthetically satisfying, but it is emotionally challenging. I always say that I don't know anyone who would want to put a painting called Rape on their living room wall. The next image is equally challenging, but more visually diverse. You'll notice that there are loose color blocks of red and gray in the upper and lower corners, and then the gray of the red in the upper and lower corners, and then the gray below and across from them. It's divided in approximately in half, although artists are never supposed to do anything directly in the middle, either horizontally or vertically. That's a no-no. But it's divided virtually in half by the red and black stripes and spirals. Those again are collaged on. The red lines are irregularly dyed bra straps. Can you all see that the title of this is Sexual Harassment?
No.
Or is
No.
that's blocked by the pictures of you all. Okay. All right. So the title of this one is Sexual Harassment. And so the bra straps are carry that motif, if you will. They are also encircled, surrounded, or possibly one might say imprisoned by black electrical wire, which has been spun around the bra straps. Everything is glued or stitched on. And when you look very closely at the bottom of several of them, you can see that the casing on the electrical wires has been removed, so that what you're getting is the copper wire, which is the live wire, inside of the black electrical wire. They come down from the top, they go different distances. This one comes up from the bottom. In other words, suggesting that nothing is predictable. Nothing can be assumed, and one has to be on guard, aware all of the time. The squares, such as they are, the lines, the spirals, are part of the visual interest of the painting. The specific collage material, the bra straps explicitly give us a familiar content, and yet ask us to consider reconsider the strength of the emotion that this painting has. The next one was a problem for me. I was really not sure how to paint child marriage. I tried a lot of different things. I had different sized wedding rings, different sized hands, different sized silhouettes, none of which really said the sort of thing I wanted to. This, and you will not see it until I tell you, is the image of a full skirt seen from above being swirled around someone who's doing a twirl, and the skirt is spinning out. To me, it's an image of joy, childlikeness, and is then soon to be lost. This is the only painting which goes beyond the red, gray, black palette of the others to include some orange and some pink, and directly in the center, a splotch of white. There are shapes created within the acrylic painting by black ribbon, which is glued into place. It creates, I wish I could point to them, but I can't. I mean, I can, but you wouldn't see it. It creates shapes that are within the circle of the so-called skirt, and ones which go all the way out to the edge of the canvas. The ones which go out tend to include both red and gray, which is an important way of thinking about the change in a young girl's life, being married before she's, I mean, barely in puberty, or possibly even younger than that. And so the way the black ribbon lines come in and back out again suggests that everything comes to the center and goes back out again. And it's there's a constant tension there for the painting. There is a similar tension between the rather graceful undulating lines of the ribbon and the rather stark theme that child marriage suggests. Okay, now we come to it. Claire, please. Lest we think that all of these issues of the Me Too movement are only in familiar terms for us. The image here of female genital mutilation, or as it's called in some places in Africa, female genital cutting, shows us that it takes place in the US and other countries, as well as in small villages in the global South. Nowhere is immune to the violence against women. Research will tell us that if a person, a family in the United States wants to have this done to their daughter, they can find a doctor with an in-house operating suite. If it's the right doctor, it can be done. So on top of the multi-shaded red acrylic painted background, there are rolls of blood red terry cloth fabric. They are stitched in X's crossing them. I think you can see that clearly from the image, with heavy duty black thread. I have to tell you that for the week after I did this, my fingertips were sore from pushing a needle through a primed canvas and half a dozen, 7, 8 layers of paint. And beyond that, which was really discouraging, is that when I looked at it, having done all that work, having bloodied my fingertips, the painting wasn't finished. There was something missing and I didn't know what. I didn't have the foggiest idea how to fix it, but I despaired at the thought of taking all of those off again and putting them back on in a different pattern. So I began to look for a way to finish the painting, which would not change the distribution of these rolls of fabric that I had created. The first thing I did was to go back through my notebooks, which I keep whenever I'm working on a series. I read extensively, both before and then all during the painting of the series. And I take notes. So I had lots of notebooks full of interesting and possibly useful information, pictures that I had taken, whatever. I didn't find anything. I went to the Virginia Museum of Fine Art, which is a lovely museum in Richmond. Didn't find anything that struck me. I flipped through issues of art magazines looking at other people's paintings. Didn't get a hint of anything that was going to work for me to finish off this painting. I finally found my answer in an end cap in Walmart, where there were spools of veiling or tulle wrapped and sitting right there, black. There was also red, but I knew that wouldn't work, and a bright lime green, which I wasn't even going to touch. When I brought these home, I wound them around the painting. They go all the way around on the diagonal in different directions, up and down and sideways, and spread some of them, tightened up some of them. And all of a sudden, everything came together. It felt right to me. The veiling, the tool, the veiling, whatever you want to call it, does several things. First of all, it ties together everything that's there, but it also creates new shapes. If you look at the negative space between the black lines, you'll see that there are a lot of four-sided, five-sided figures, a couple of triangles, which add a different sense of completeness to the painting itself. I think the painting takes its strength primarily from those very strong black diagonals, but I also like the idea of veiling the unspeakable practice of cutting girls. Oh, so that was a tough one. And the next one is, well, it's called domestic violence. If you look at the acrylic painting behind the collage elements, you might see what you think is a building with red windows and gray structure. I have to tell you that even though I can see that now, that was not what was on my mind when I was painting it. I was painting shapes and colors and proportions, if you will. So after that, what I did was to take red chenille yarn. If you don't know chenille, it's yarn which it has little nubs of additional yarn along the length of the yarn. It's very soft. I grew up with a house that had chenille bedspreads on every bed, although they were not red. But it's a very soft, very, back up, thank you. It's a very soft, very comfortable sort of feeling yarn. And I've never seen it made up into anything, but that's not to say that it couldn't be a sweater or what have you. It is, what you then see are knotted sections of black leather bootlace, which pulls the yarn off of its diagonals, the diagonals I gave it, and ties it together, pulls it together almost, changes the strength of those diagonal lines and encases them in half a dozen different knots, some loose, some strong. Some of the diagonals are pulled in one direction and some slightly in another. But all of the time, there is this feeling of the tension of the very stiff black leather bootlace against the very soft and yielding, unfortunately, red chenille yarn. I wish you could see these in person. This one particularly repays even touching, although obviously we're not supposed to do that when we look at art. But really, if you could, even looking at it, you would have a greater sense of the softness and the hardness of the elements that are in there. And you can see in the upper left-hand corner, for example, how there's different spacing between the yarn. There's some what looks like fairly regular spacing, then a big chunk of open space, then some tightly knitted together, strands of yarn, and then some space, and then some more. And so the whole thing is rather interpretive of what might be a piece of knitting, a piece of home activity, and a piece of what a woman might do with herself. The next painting, I seem to be going through this more rapidly than I had expected. The next painting, which is called Incest, is, whoops, wait a second, what did I just do? Called Incest, is one that I did not paint until almost a year after the other 7. I did not know what to do. As you can see, we've photographed it different. Claire photographed it for me differently so that you can tell how the ribbon hangs off of the edge of the canvas. All of the time, whenever something goes off the normal dimensions of a canvas like this, it draws our attention. This one falls to the bottom. It also is three-dimensional away from the face of the canvas. All of the paintings have three-dimensional objects that come off of the face of the painting, and they are drawing our attention more so than just the acrylic painting. In some cases, one might almost be tempted to think of the acrylic painting on the canvas as a backdrop for the elements which are collaged. And I would warn not to do that, simply because the way in which the color is laid on, the multiple layers of color, the variation in tone and depth, all have something to say about the idea that I'm trying to convey. If you take this from the top to the bottom, what you see is multiple strands of red and white ribbon, which are braided together and trapped behind a grid of wire. Just above where the braid or the ribbon come outside of the grid to hang free, and I don't think you can see it on your screen unless the sort of glint of the metal shows, there is a tight wrap of metal holding that braid together and holding it where it is. It goes across the, yes, thank you, there it is. And it attempts, as you can see, to keep the ribbon braided and to keep it inside or attached to the grid. Not happening. The ribbon falls free and is loose. If there were a fan blowing, you would see it wafting across the wall and the bottom half of the canvas. So what you're seeing here in an artistic sense is a number of hard edges, that is the grid, and then the soft ribbon, the crisscross of the lines, and the softer angles that the ribbon takes both when it's behind the grid and as it falls free of the grid. And then also the red, black, and gray, which sits, well, the gray which sits behind the upper portion of the braided ribbon, the red which clearly dominates the space, and then the use of black in the grid, but no black in the ribbon. So the color palette remains the same as with the others, but is not, does not allow for black within the image that we might see as the child, the woman, the child, the girl, victim of incest. The next image is a horrible subject called honor killing, but there is kind of a funny thing to it as well. This painting is dominated by the harsh black lines that go down the right-hand side, which are contrasted with the somewhat slimmer and wavy red lines which go down the left-hand side. These verticals are broken only by a thick red horizon which really goes across the painting underneath the black stripes over top of the red stripes. The black stripes are pieces of Spanx. They're circular in shape, and so they were inserted over the stretcher of the painting and pulled into position so that they hold the painting together, if you will. And I like the notion of Spanx because they are what are used to control and confine women's bodies. When the Spanx are worn by a woman, they are usually her choice. She is putting on Spanx to control those parts of her body that she's not crazy about, okay? On the other hand, honor killing is a very different kind of control of a woman's body. It is control without her consent. It is control which can lead to death. It is control which is decided by whomever wishes to enforce that control and has no, what do we call them, limitations on it. It is completely outside the realm of the woman, except that she is the one to whom everything is done. She does no doing, versus the woman who puts on a pair of Spanx to, I don't know, whatever she chooses to do with it. She is the one doing, as well as the one to whom the constriction is being done. That's my cat in the background, one of my cats in the background, being whiny. Okay, the 8th image in this Me Too series, Claire, is the most visually complex, and it may be one of my favorites, maybe my favorite. In the background, well, not the background, but in the part that's painted in acrylic, which is, I think you can tell which is collaged on and which is painted, we see different shapes of red within the larger red shape and different shades of gray within the gray shape. In other words, these are spaces where not a whole lot is happening. In artistic terms, it's a place for the viewer to rest the eye. On the other hand, just flat one color paint would be exceedingly boring, and it would probably be not so restful so much as distracting, because the rest of the painting is so dense with texture and color and content. The 3 collaged shapes, which have irregular holes torn in them, and if you can see them, smaller diamond-shaped holes, are pieces of fishnet pantyhose. Oh goodness, which seemed appropriate for a painting that is about sex trafficking. The red cord, which is knotted in several places, goes through one of the irregular holes, comes around, twists around another piece of cording, goes through the next 2 holes in the next piece of the fishnet hose, lays on top of the 3rd piece of the fishnet hose, and then goes into swirls and swiggles till we almost don't know where it ends. The black line is made out of braided coiled leather. In the left, where it comes in from the left-hand side of the painting, it is almost coiled in on itself, but then the braided cording comes down, wraps itself around the red cording, goes up through a loop, through and around a section of the red, several sections of the red cording, makes another loop around another piece of the red cording, and goes back to loop around again before coming up underneath and then over several bits of the red cording to end itself in the upper piece of the fishnet pantyhose. The pieces of this are linked by this undulating red cord, which is then disrupted or disturbed by this braided, coiled black leather cording. If you look at the textures, what you can see are the complexity of both the textures and, I think, the experience of or the idea of sex trafficking, which is more than one thing, if you will. There's kidnapping, there's pandering, there's pimping, there's the possibility of rape, and so on and so forth. But the textures, the multiplicity of things going on here adds a great deal of visual interest and aesthetic satisfaction, in addition to carrying the idea of the sex trafficking forward. And so those are the 8 paintings of the Me Too series. You will have noticed that it's easier for me to talk about the materials. This was a very difficult series to create. It was very emotional for me. I tried and failed, God, at least a dozen times to make paintings which would say what I wanted them to say, and be what I wanted them to be. I tried little bits of representation, parts of people's bodies, silhouettes of people's bodies. I tried some abstraction, which only made sense to me, as people who looked at it were happy to tell me. I tried random color blocking and random shapes, and cut up bits of construction paper to lay down on backgrounds in order to see what would work and what eventually did not work. I tried a wide range of colors before I finally settled on the red, gray, and black. It was a long period of time, probably 4 years, during which I was struggling with these paintings, how to make these paintings, and how to be sure that they said what I wanted to say without, what am I trying to say? I wanted them to say what I have to say and be true to both the subject of the Me Too series and also to the women who have experienced any or many of these violations. It was not an easy 5-year immersion. Today, I want to point out that I'm speaking as the painter of these issues. I know what I intended to do. I know what I did. When I say what it means, I am talking about the way I, as the painter, see that it means. But meaning, and I'm drawing now on my experience as a literary critic and a teacher of literature for 35 years, meaning is part of a 3-part dialogue. One part is the painter, that's me. Second part is the image, you've got them on the screen. But the third part is the viewer. And meaning is not complete until there is a viewer who can bring in additional background, additional ideas, additional information, additional baggage, if you will, that gives some nuance and depth and interest, and then creates a meaning. That meaning may be explicit to that particular viewer, but it is nonetheless meaning when it is joined with the image and with the painter's point of view.
We have a question.
Okay, if you'll give me just a quickie comment, I'm going to move to Q&A right now.
Okay.
If you have a question that's not answered today, or you think of something later on in the week you'd like to talk about, or you just want to tell me something that has occurred to you, you can reach me at my website, which is Kathy with a K, Klein, Klein, studio.com.
And Claire has posted it in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you, Claire. Claire's got all of us taken care of. Okay, I'm looking at the questions.
Yes.
Okay.
So, Nimit Rehan, I'll read it out to you. Nimit Rehan asks, in sex trafficking, is the cord/string attached through or collaged onto the canvas? And she says, a very emotional and symbolic painting.
It is attached to the canvas by stitches. All of the cording is attached by stitches rather than by glue. And it goes through pieces of the fishnet stocking and pieces of each other. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else would like to ask a question, even if you don't want to put it in chat?
Thanks, Robin. I appreciate that.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Certainly.
So tell me what inspired you to do this series?
Let's see. I have done a large installation on colonialism, which included both paintings and sculptures. I had done a series of paintings that I call Congo Mamas from my time in the Congo. And I had done a series of breaking out paintings, which were on the cover of the exhibition catalog and which you saw at the very beginning of this presentation. I was looking for subject matter that would lend itself to a series. I was not looking for a one-off, and I was definitely looking for something that would integrate elements of my own life and things that were meaningful to me. So that always means, for me, things that were meaningful, almost always comes back to feminism and feminist women's issues. So that was kind of a given. The question was, what else would I draw on to come up with a content, an idea, a flicker of interest that could keep me going for a long period of time. And that was, it turns out to be my Catholic upbringing. I sometimes think that it didn't have very much influence on my life now that I'm 50 years beyond all of that. But clearly, it was there, lurking in the background, and was something that made it possible for me to meld the question of the deadly sins and or mortal sin, or whatever you want to call it, serious sin, and the issue of women. And I looked up the original 7 deadly sins just to be sure I hadn't made any mistakes, and by golly, there was nothing in there about rape. I even looked up the 7 deadly sins for the modern era, and while they were more relevant, they were things like eco-consciousness and proper corporate behavior, they still didn't say anything about rape or sex trafficking or genital mutilation. And at that point, I realized that if nobody else was going to do it, I was going to do it. And that's how I got there.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
It looks like Carol Rogers has a question.
Sure, Carol. Carol is the person who's
Yeah.
responsible for the exhibit coming to Nuzat's attention.
Oh, I was going to say, actually, Kathy is, of course, the person responsible for the exhibit. Gloucester is my hometown, and I was so delighted when our local, really good little art studio had Kathy exhibit there. And so Kathy just welcomed virtually to the club. Wish that we could have been doing this in a different time. But I've got a question about what happens next with this series. As I look at them again online, you know, I might, if I didn't know what it was, hang the sex trafficking one in my home, because it is just visually stunning. And you don't have to necessarily know what it is. But what does one do now with this series, which is so gripping? It's actually heartrending and visually compelling. And as you said, in terms of the rape one, it's not something you want to put on your living room wall, though the colors in that, if you, again, don't know what it is just stunning.
Right. But
So,
once you
so
know,
what do you do? Yeah.
once you know what they are, you can't not know it. So that would be the difficulty in putting it on your living room wall. Once you know it's rape, you can't exactly put it up there next to the television. What I do, this is its second showing. I hope to have more places that would like to show it. That's not an easy thing to do from a small town in Gloucester, from somebody who came to painting very late in life and has no institutional connections whatsoever. Other than that, sadly, they sit in my storage, and that's about it. Fortunately, I had a fairly satisfying, long, financially acceptable career, and so I do not need to sell my paintings in order to pay for my supplies. And I decided, not long after I started painting, that I was not going to paint in order to sell, that I was going to paint what I wanted to paint. And I've stuck with that, I'm happy to say. One of the questions here from Cheryl, how long did the series take to create? Once I knew what I wanted to do, Cheryl, it went rather quickly, but it took me 4 years to get to know what I wanted to do. I would say I managed to paint 7 of the 8, excluding Incest, probably in a year, maybe even a little less than a year. But I could never have done that had I not been trying and discarding a whole lot of canvases and sheets of paper and ideas and thoughts. So the question has 2 parts, really. How long did it take to paint is different from how long did it take to create. And I'm glad you put the question in that form. Okay, Linda Brooks has a question.
Hey, Kathy, thanks for showing us these pictures tonight. Just want to let you know, in the morning, I always watch CBS Morning News, and there, Laura O'Donnell on, who hosts the evening news, she's doing she did 2 years of series on women in the military. And if you watch it, it's almost like looking at your paintings. And
Oh,
we always think about sex trafficking being somewhere else, Malta, you know, all these different places, but it's here in our country. And I really think it's in the military, because these young women, she has a story on 4 women, and what they went through. A couple committed suicide because wherever they were transferred to different bases. They were sexually abused, and nobody in the military, they go before Congress and say, I'm going to do something about it, and they aren't doing it. So we also visually need to look at this and say, these pictures are what's happening in our country today and our military to our young women. And I thank you for doing that, because right now it's really emotional, because, you know, if you watch the story that what she's doing about what these women went through, and most of the reports you get back are redacted because nobody wants to talk about it.
oh, right.
It's happening in our military to our young women. So thank you for doing this. And if you get a chance, whatever medium you use, watch it, because it's very upsetting, but it's something that needs to be changed.
Thank you for bringing that. I just made a note while you were talking about that. Yeah, I will look for it. How are the black silk stockings attached to the canvas? If you're asking about rape, those are glued onto the top of the canvas. If you're asking about sex trafficking, the fishnets are sewn on by hand. Abby Anderson says, how did creating the series change you? Well, I learned a lot. I had to dig deep within myself in order to do it. As I said, I have not experienced, beyond sexual harassment, I have not experienced any of these things. And so, but I had to bring myself into a place where I could feel or imagine or somehow take into myself what that might be like. I know no one who has not experienced it can get there, but it seemed important to me to dig down deeply and to read transcripts and interviews and memoirs and books. I know women who've had most of these experiences have happened to women I know. I do not know anyone who died of honor killing, and I do not know anyone that I know of who has been genitally mutilated. That's not something people would go around and talk about anyway. So maybe I do, and I just don't know it. How did it change me? The best way I can say that is that I'm having a terrible time coming up with the next idea of what to paint. It drained me completely, and I found myself in the strange position of not knowing where I wanted to go next, not knowing what to do next. It's almost too powerful for me to think about something else. Teresa says, did you interview victims of abuse prior to creating your paintings? Not in the specific sense, no. I did not try to find people who'd had these experiences. I know women who've had these experiences. I taught young, well, not just necessarily young, but I taught women in women's studies classes for 35 years, and we talked about these issues, and they openly talked about their experiences. So yes, I've talked to real people who've had these real experiences, but I did not do it in what you might think of as an interview format. Oh, I love this one, Heather. How much time, considering how much time and study you spent on each subject matter, how much of your work was mapped out before you started versus what you did when you began painting? I would have to say that everything I did in terms of time and study, which happened not only before, but during the painting, was then set aside or what do I want to say, digested, fully digested, so that once I started painting, it all happened there on the canvas. And when it didn't work there on the canvas. And I had to go to Walmart and find veiling. I had to sift through my collage boxes to find cord and bootlaces, and I had to find dye and cut off my old bra straps and dye them red. Each painting made its own demands on me as a painting. And so it was always that way. Has your art always been non-objective? Pretty much so, but I have to be honest and confess that I can't draw. I could draw. That's not the right way to say it. I always say to people, if you put in as much time doing the thing you say you can't do as you put in on something else, you'd be able to do it. So if I were willing to devote 10,000 hours, I'm sure I could learn to draw. But I have not enjoyed it enough to put in 10,000 hours. And so I do, I paint non-objectively because it is the other side of the equation, and because it lets me get away without having to study drawing. Cindy, thank you. These are stunning and stimulating and should be seen by everyone. And Abby says thank you, and thank you, Abby. Jessica, thank you, super powerful work. Great to hear about its creation. Linda Brooks, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Does anyone else have any other questions?
Just a reminder that if you have things you want to say to me other than this format, or you think of them, you know, next month or next year, you have my website address. Just get in touch with me. Those of you who are here because you know me, know that I have no trouble talking or writing. And those of you who haven't known me before can probably tell from this evening that I'm pretty okay at that.
Kathy, I want to thank you so much, not only for this evening, but also because after Carol told me about your exhibit and the time it took me to get to see you and to see the work, and then with COVID, we had to keep postponing your exhibit. I just cannot tell you how much I thought about your exhibition, I thought about your paintings, and how powerful it is. I think everybody who's been on this chat, on this Zoom today, is going to be thinking about this for a very long time. Not only the subject matter, but also I think to understand the process of creativity. It is not easy. It does not come in one go, in one flash for most people. And I think you have explained that so well, because I think when people look at a painting, they figure, oh, she just threw it together, you know, and I think the thought, the research, everything that went into it is so well communicated by you this evening. And I know that everyone appreciates that. I also want to tell you that everybody who's on the Zoom should be talking about this and telling people about Kathy's work and directing them to her website or to our link of this exhibition, so that you never know, just like Carol saw it and passed it on to me, this may end up at other venues through this sort of thing. So thank you again very much. Thank everyone for participating and for joining us this evening. And of course, Claire, thank you very much for keeping us all online. Thank you.
Can I say just one thing? What I've really appreciated is the fact that a lot of these subjects are kept under wraps. We do not want to take these words, say them aloud. So, and most of us have experienced a lot of what you're doing. And just for that, I think it has great value. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your comments and for your attention. And if I can just give a sort of like silver lining to COVID, most of you would not have been able to come to the opening event in DC. And so for me, in a way, this is a chance to reach out to a lot of people I wouldn't necessarily be able to talk to if we'd done it there. So that's a good thing.
Yes.
The only good thing about COVID.
Thank you again, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Kathy. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.